So without further ado, the phrase is always save the best till last. I think we're very fortunate to have a group of first among equals who are speaking with us today. Please give an enormous round of applause. You can't miss the guy. He's all over YouTube. Ranjan Bhattacharya.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, brilliant. That's the clicker, that's the tech. Welcome to this conference. And, oh dear me, first tenor of the day. I love the way they've organized the tables, don't you? I mean, it's so telling. I mean, what we have is, of course, we have London straight here in the center. That's nice. And the other high-value areas, we've got the southeast there and the southwest there. That's kind of nice. Got the Midlands and the north over there, and we've got the offshore advisory havens, God knows where they are at the back there. It's very interesting the way we've set it all out. I'm going to ask you later on to give me regional accents when you ask questions. I think that would be kind of a bit of fun. So, what are we going to talk about today? A bit of scene setting. Because I've been doing property for 30 years. I started in 1990. Every few years, the optimum strategy to kind of do property well kind of changes a little bit. And I'm a great believer in really being a little bit lazy. You know, you understand which direction all the winds are blowing in. You know, whether it's regulatory winds, whether it's planning rule winds, whether it's market trends, whatever it is, and then set your sail accordingly to benefit from all that wind and then have an effortless journey. And every few years, what happens is the market changes, the regulation changes, the tax changes, the rules change, all sorts of things change. And things you were doing a few years ago don't work as well. And then it gets a little bit more complicated to adjust your sails, to recalibrate your course, because the winds have changed. So my policy has always been to pick the right strategy to maximize the benefit of the winds at the moment and over the next few years. And at the moment, I don't see anything else that gives a better return on time than repurposing defunct commercial buildings. Now, commercial buildings only exist as a place to do business and commerce. And throughout time, really, since people have started doing commerce, commercial buildings become defunct. You know, the first round of defunct buildings were all those warehouses at the side of canals when railways came along. You know, and then when the motor car came in, Camden Market used to be stables for 10,000 horses serving North London. And of course, that became a defunct piece of commercial real estate and had to be repurposed. In the 1980s, we had manufacturing move out of the UK, and a lot of factories became defunct and needed to be repurposed. Now, the thing with all these building types is they tended to be big. They tend to be 10, 20, 30,000 square foot or more. And it tends to be the bigger developers that were attracted to repurpose those buildings. And also in the past, you could only do those repurposings with planning permission. Now we have a situation where a lot of the buildings that are becoming defunct are not of interest to these large-scale developers. I mean, you're not going to get Barratt Homes interested in repurposing a William Hill betting shop on a secondary parade. It's too small beer for them. But we have a little problem. The problem is that, well, who's going to repurpose them? Well, the larger developers aren't interested. How about the smaller developers? The big barrier for small developers is what? What do you think the biggest barrier is for small developers? Planning. People say funding, but I think that's a myth. And I'm going to show you today from some examples that if you find the right deal with the right numbers, the funding is easy. The funding is not a problem. It is actually the planning. So those pesky guys in the planning department. What do they call those guys? They're called development control departments. They're not development enablement, are they? They're development control. That means computer says no, basically. The problem is that smaller developers can't fund uncertainty. We can't land bank like the big guys. You know, so that makes it very, very difficult then to speculatively try to convert a building without any hope or knowledge of whether or not you're going to get planning or not. And then enter onto the stage permitted development, a light touch planning regime where if you know what you're doing, if you know the checklist of criteria to follow, you can assess before you buy a property whether or not it's going to fit the template for conversion to an alternative use. And 56 days, you've pretty much got the permission. So that then changes the whole game. And then roll on the other factor, which was happening anyway pre-COVID. I mean, we all know, shopping's moved online. People have less requirement for office space now. And all these trends have been accelerated because of COVID. What was going to play out over 5, 6, 7 years has kind of played out over 18 months thanks to COVID. So shops, there's a massive oversupply of shops. There's a massive oversupply of office space. We run a serviced office centre in St Albans. It's home to about 40 businesses. And we rent suites. So the serviced office business is a bit like HMOs without the regulation. I mean, the cash flow from single lets is pretty much the same sort of uplift, but you don't have the regulation of HMOs. But when people rent a 6-person office, they'll rent a 6-person office suite, and you go on their website and you see there are 20 people in the About Our People page. Why? Because they're not all in every day. They just need a base for a few people. They come in dribs and drabs, they use the meeting rooms and that kind of thing. So just because a firm may have 10 employees, it doesn't mean they need space for 10 employees to be on site every day. So the office market has transformed. So we've got all these trends that have just come together, and they've created a fantastic set of wins, where if you just sort of set your boat with the sails and you benefit from all those trends, you're going places without trying too hard. So that's what I want to share with you today. A little bit about my background, I guess. 1990, I started in property. I did residential property like everyone else. I did it as a sideline to a corporate career, did all the management consulting stuff. I went full-time, if you like to call it, in 2001. And my bag was converting larger buildings into flats to keep for long-term rental, focused mainly in North London. Now, round about the early noughties, you noticed something happen. And what was happening was that there was yield compression in London. I mean, you were getting double-digit yields when you were doing this sort of stuff in the old days. But then yields started to get lower as capital values rose. So one way people who liked investing in the southeast tackled the yield compression problem was to go up north. For me, going up north, well, it needs to have a tube line. So Edgware, Cockfosters, New Southgate, that's up north. Sorry to the tables at the back, but that's up north. So how do I square that circle of yield compression? And I kind of discovered that, well, if you get commercial buildings or mixed-use buildings and either fully or partially convert them to residential use, then the blended yield on the whole building is actually equivalent to what it was in the old days before the yield compression started. So that's really what got me on the journey to converting commercial to residential buildings. I did my first commercial to residential building of a shop on the Holloway Road in London in 2006. And that was under full planning permission, and yes, it was an absolute pain in the bum, because it was very uncertain as to whether or not you're going to get the permission or not. And I've done a whole bunch of these conversions in pretty much every year since 2006 under full planning permission. And then in 2013, I just couldn't believe what suddenly had happened. Everything that I was doing, a lot of what I was doing, suddenly become so easy with the advent of permitted development rights that were introduced in 2013. Some of the stuff that was so complex became like as easy as cutting butter with a knife, because it came under this 56-day prior approval regime. And then in August the 1st, of course, they have extended the reach of the permitted development rights still further. And I'm telling you, and I'll share with you some examples of stuff that people are doing right now, that the potential of what you can do with the new rules that were introduced on 1st of August is not understood in the marketplace, and therefore the potential of what you can do is not baked into asking price of properties. Now, when the first round of PD came in 2013, It was people. No one knew what it was about, quite frankly, and it was a lot of fun. You know, you were picking up properties at asking prices and turning them around and making good profits simply because of that commercial to residential uplift, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But when we got on to 2015 and 2016, the market and vendors started to understand the power of PD, and they even started putting in PD applications and selling a site with PD already in place. And that's what I mean by when the potential starts to get baked into the asking price. Now, we're still in this golden period, and I think it's going to last for at least 18 months, where the potential of what you can do under the new rules is not baked into the asking price. Now, what does that mean? If you want to do a good deal in property, you know, if you're putting out letters and you are doing direct-to-vendor marketing, essentially, you know, traditionally, you're looking for motivated sellers, people who will accept a little bit lower price in exchange for a quick sale. But the great thing about this new commercial property environment and the fact that the potential hasn't been baked into asking prices is you don't need to find motivated sellers. You can pick deals off at the asking price because the market doesn't understand what is possible under the new PD rights. So if you are clued up on that, then it's win-win for you guys. Does that make sense so far? So that's what I'm going to bang on about today. I have a YouTube channel. Who watches my YouTube? Oh, quite a few of you. Good, good, good. I have a YouTube channel. I run some specialist training courses on commercial to residential conversion. Has anyone seen this show on the telly? Property Elevator, yeah. If you haven't seen it, you can just scan that code and catch it there. Property TV have started a new on-demand service. And so if you missed it, it's propertyelevator.tv. It's free. You can just sign up for their on-demand catch-up service and watch the entire Series 3, propertyelevator.tv is the website. So in Series 3, it's quite interesting. There were 25 people that pitched for funding. It's a bit like Dragon's Den, for people who haven't seen it. And there are 5 angels on the show. I'm one of them. And we invest our own money into deals that people pitch. And of the 25 deals that were pitched in Season 3, the most exciting ones were the commercial to residential conversion deals. And there's an interesting thing which I noticed in this show, is the dynamic changes. So at first, someone comes on to pitch their deal to us 5. The minute we see that it's an interesting deal, the pitching dynamic changes from the investor pitching to the angels pitching to the entrepreneur to say, sort of back us. Now, when you watch the series, the deals that seem to attract the most attention among the angels are the commercial to residential deals, particularly under permitted development. Why is that? Why is that? I'll tell you why in 3 simple ways. First of all, commercial property is usually valued at 1/3 or 1/4 per square foot as residential property. When you do permitted development as opposed to planning, you have certainty that you're going to get the permission in 56 days. And when you do the build-out, you don't have to put foundations in, do ground clearance and all of that. The building is already built, the wall's already up, the roof is up, it's waterproof. You're doing internal reconfiguration. So you're in and out relatively quickly. So for an investor to back your deal, and you can show a quick exit, you can show a baked-in uplift and relatively low risk because the planning risk is far simplified and the build-out time is squashed. That's what investors love, and that's why you find that the commercial to resi PD deals are very, very sought after and attract a lot of interest and a lot of fighting among the angels to do those sort of deals. So that's well worth watching. You can catch it on my YouTube as well. I'm nearly up to 50,000 subscribers, so I'd really love it if you can scan that code and subscribe. But we put out a lot of commercial to resi content on there. Now, I've talked about PD and planning. I used to do a lot of planning. I still do a bit of planning, but it's really, well, I won't talk about that now. PD is so simpler. The trouble with planning permission is I don't believe the planning system is fit for purpose in the UK. The no is the default position, it seems. It's fine if you're doing a little household extension or something like that, but the minute you're trying to create multiple units, multiple dwellings, there seems to be a default position of saying no. And it gets worse in the higher value areas for all sorts of other reasons I won't go into. The great thing about PD is that the government have gone along and said, look, you councils are failing with this, we're not building enough homes, let's sort of reform this whole thing. So the government have imposed a set of criteria that apply the same across England. And that's very, very important, because what you don't want is these differences between local authorities and all of that sort of stuff. What I like about PD is you get the approval in 56 days. And it's just a more certain way of doing things. Because the criteria on which your application will be judged is known, it is possible to assess whether you're going to get the permitted development before you actually buy a property. So I've talked about this in my introduction, so I'm going to skip over these because I want to spend some time with some examples. There are more vacant commercial property than ever before, particularly retail and office space. There's still a massive shortage of residential properties. 300,000 homes are needed. The actual build-out rate is not even 100,000 at the moment. Planning system doesn't work, quite frankly. And small-scale developers are not, need some certainty in the planning system to be enticed to repurpose the smaller buildings. Now, this is an interesting thing about why this is such a great angle and opportunity. Commercial property is valued differently. If it has an income stream, it's valued based on the income stream that it generates. If it doesn't have an income stream, it's more difficult to value. Residential property, it doesn't matter whether it's vacant, who the tenant is, or anything. It's valued based on a comparables bricks and mortar basis. Its value is not dependent on its rental value, who the occupier is, who the tenant is, how much they're paying for rent, and all that sort of stuff. As a result, you tend to find that residential values are a lot higher than commercial values, sometimes 3 or 4 times as much. So the simple thing is, you buy the thing for a certain amount per square foot, you spend a little bit on conversion costs, and you've baked in quite a significant amount of profit. Now, what we're finding with commercial to residential conversions is that the key figures to look at are 30% margin, 40% return on costs. I find that very difficult to achieve when I look at traditional development projects. But with commercial to residential conversions under PD, you can find deal after deal that returns 30% margin, 40% return on costs. That makes it easy to finance, and it also is very good for exiting. And I'll come on to that in a mo. So if you are you guys at the front tables here, when you are looking at this, you can afford to spend a little bit more on conversion costs. So the kind of buildings and works that will be suitable for you guys is a little bit different for the folks in the middle tables, because your end values are slightly lower. So in some of the projects we're doing in the high value areas, we will do things like remove load-bearing walls, remove chimney breasts, do a lot of building works. In the more medium value areas, you tend to want to do stuff where the building is pretty much there and doesn't need much internal configuration. So newer buildings tend to be more cost-effective because you don't have the higher end values to kind of rely on, if that makes sense. So the strategy works everywhere, but building viability, the base material that you're working with, the viability to convert a building depends on the end GDVs in the area that you're investing in. Yeah, the lower value areas, it's uneconomic to do massively old buildings. Right, I talked about, there are some great property elevator pitches that talk about deals that I'm going to talk about today. This one in Series 2 was Yogesh, the Croydon office to residential conversion, was the only deal in Series 2 that got an offer of funding from all 5 angels. And that was simply because he'd secured a site with an option. He'd secured a site under an option, a small office building in Croydon, which could be converted to 3 flats under PD. He only wanted the funding after the permitted development was obtained. And at that point, he would exercise the option to purchase the property. And because the building envelope was there, it was basically a 6-7 month build out. So you can see why all 5 angels wanted to do that deal. There was certainty, easy exit, and pretty much a baked-in profit because you're buying low-value commercial stock, spending a little bit to convert it to residential, and baking in a lot of value. So permitted development, the 1st of August was a real game changer with the new rules that have come in, Class G and Class MA. I'll share with you some examples of those. It's a simplified prior approval process, 56 days and you've got that permission. But what are these Class MA and Class G type rules? They are a bit confusing. It's all a bit confusing, and I like that because it means the market thinks it's confusing. The first area of confusion is the word class. We use class as a usage class of property, and we use class for permitted development rights that describe the things you could do to those property. So one use of class is as a noun, if you like, and one use of class is as a verb. First area of confusion, don't you just love the government? If you actually read the legislation for Class G and MA, it's contradictory. You can do some things under one, some things under another. It seems to have been designed by 2 different focus groups, by the looks of it, who never talk to each other. This was a massive change they introduced in September 2020, and I'm sure Susie will talk about this afternoon, which allows commercial buildings to be repurposed to other commercial uses. We had a very archaic system that was brought in 1948, where you had separate usage classes for different types of commercial property, and if you want to convert from one to the other, you had to go for planning permission. So if I've got an empty bank building, I want to make it into a restaurant, I'd have to go for full planning permission, and they'd usually say no. From September the 1st, 2020, you can make any building, these all became Class E buildings, and any building on this page you can convert to any other use without asking planning permission from anyone. And that's been very useful. I did a video on this on YouTube which explains this a little bit more. And it also talks about how businesses have changed their business models to work around this stupid usage class that existed. Greggs, for example, they call themselves Greggs the bakers, but they don't actually bake because they can't. They wanted to expand their store network. To bake, they would have to have taken A3 premises. They expanded by taking on A1 retail premises up and down the country. They bake their sausage rolls off-site, and they warm them in the store. You get shit food in Starbucks and Costa. This is recorded, I shouldn't have said that. You get shit food. Why? Because they can't do any more than do a toasted panini, because they've expanded coffee shops by doing A1, by taking on A1 sites. Because to cook anything, you'd need an A3 license. So that's all changed now. This change was brought in September 2020, very much all of a sudden. Then I think the market was trying to get to grips with it all, and then bang, COVID came, everything was locked down. We're out of COVID now, and I think the market is slowly understanding what this power of Class E usage means, and the flexibility it gives property owners to repurpose commercial buildings, not just to residential, but to other commercial uses as well. But this video kind of explains a little bit more about that. I think, as I've said, there's a massive opportunity for people to take first mover advantage. The PD is not widely known. The other thing is, when rules come in, there are loads of anomalies. Now, we have legislation that's been drafted for Class G, which applies equally to a former bank building as it does a restaurant, as it does a gym. Now, how can you have legislation that applies equally to so many different building types without creating anomalies? And when I say anomalies, translate that to entrepreneurial opportunity for the first movers to take advantage of. That's what that means. Now, those anomalies will be plugged. With every PD, they keep revising it every now and then and changing the rules a little bit. So it's very, very important to get first off the gate. With Class MA, you can convert any Class E building. It's pretty much internal configuration that you can do, and you can make any number of flats subject to these criteria. With the new Class G, you can do 2 flats above any Class E building. It's allowed in conservation areas and all of that sort of stuff. No external alterations. So there's plenty of opportunity there. Now, I set myself a little objective in August. I wanted to get a Class G and a Class MA project on the go. I wanted to find one basically in August that I can just do. And I wanted to find these 15 minutes distance of where I live in Rickmansworth, Hertfordshire. So I found a Class G and I found a Class MA. So this is the Class G. It's a lovely little shop and uppers. What we're doing with this is doing simple 2-bedroom flats. The thing I love about these sort of buildings is in the 70s it was extended at the back. So one of my principles is buy the maximum floor space for the money. The price per square foot that you're paying then comes down dramatically, and you can do more with it when you convert it to residential use. So 2-bedroom flats above a shop. The great thing about these developments is that if I'm building 3 new houses in a field, you don't get a penny of cash flow until the very end. Here, there's income from the shop from day one, because all your development activity is above. This one, special thank you to Matt Hancock. Have I spelled his name wrong? No, that was deliberate. Now, of course, right in the middle of the Matt Hancock affair scenario was the Amersham and Chesham by-election. The upper floors of this building was the Conservative Parliamentary Office for the seat of Amersham. It's been there forever. And obviously, when the Lib Dems narrowly picked the Conservatives to the post, they had to move out of there, and the landlord was wondering what to do with the property. Enter myself. This is something that we picked up. This is a Class MA deal. Again, you can see from the floor plans, I love these TARDIS-type buildings. If you've got the windows, it's been extended previously. You've got a massive floor plate. You can see the back half has just been completely extended in the 80s. So it's new built, it's easy to convert, and all the rest of it. 4 flats, PD, your job done. Now, the point of really talking about some of these case studies is this is in the month of August. Both of these were from commercial agents, and there was nothing clever about them. There was nothing clever about price reductions, motivated sellers, anything like that. It's simply that the market does not understand what you can do with it, particularly under the new rules. This is bread and butter. I talk about why it's so beneficial to take long, deep shops that were used for selling products, which are now defunct, and then keep a smaller shop at the front and keep a flat at the back. Now, if you want to know why that works, just scan that video. You can see one of my students who made 200 grand on a deal in West Ealing, and see the before and after, and you'll get a full lowdown of that particular strategy, because I think I'm nearly going to be out of time soon. But this is one of these deals that we're doing now, which is in sunny Richmond. It's literally 10 minutes away from the river. Now, this was not possible before August the 1st. Why? Before August the 1st, this particular area in Richmond is a conservation area. And before August the 1st, you could do flats behind shops under Class M, but that didn't apply in conservation areas. Now, of course, MA applies in conservation areas. So you can take this shop in Richmond, which before August the 1st had no PD rights on the ground floor, now suddenly has. But the market hasn't got a Scooby-Doo what's going on. So this is one of my students that's doing this particular deal. They bought the thing, we're funding it, because I fund a lot of the stuff that some of our people get up to. And this is interesting, because in Richmond, they've actually applied for an Article 4 to stop us doing this sort of thing. But when they apply for an Article 4, they have to put you on 1 year's notice before it comes into effect. So it's not, the Article 4 is not going to come into effect until August next year. So it's going to take 56 days for a PD application. Do you think we'll get it? Yeah, we'll get it. You know, so there are certain opportunities which are time limited, and it's worth clearing yourself up with this sort of thing right now. Quick introduction to funding. If you want more, I'm doing a session online which is free. Just scan that and register for that on the 30th of November. But a quick thing on funding. Secure the site. You can secure the site with an option or just exchange contracts with 5% deposit. Apply for PD. The PD will take you 56 days. And then, as soon as you've got the PD, you complete the purchase based on the value that you've brought to the building by getting your PD. So that means you can pretty much borrow a little bit more loan to value than you'd get if you purchased it without PD, and you certainly get 100% of your development costs to build out, assuming your GDVs are good. And by that, I mean 30% margin, 40% return on costs. This is one that we have just done, actually, well, secured, I should say, using the same model. So this is a building in, well, they told me it was in Leicester Square, but then I found out it was in Leicester Buyer Square. But it's a lovely building. It's a former Alliance and Leicester head office, big, chunky, 7,500 square foot building. So we've secured this site. We've actually raised the funding on this. We raised £1 million worth of funding from shareholders. We've got a few of our shareholders in the room to fund this project. We're funding it purely out of shareholders' equity. Now, the completion is not until the end of January. So when we complete, the PD will be in place. So basically, the shareholders have an immediate return on completion simply because the value will have enhanced just by getting the PD. So this stuff works. It works very, very well, particularly now. Oh, this building, by the way, is you know, I talked about be wary of older buildings in lesser value areas. Now, this building, in 1980, this used to be a Grade 1 listed building. They got it delisted. Because I don't know how they did this, but what they did is they left the facade, which used to be an old hotel, and then they rebuilt it from the back. So we've got a 1980s building in its entirety with concrete modern floors, you know, soundproofing's all there. It's lovely from a conversion point of view, but beautiful from an external point of view because you've got that original facade. It's kind of the best of all worlds for dealing with doing commercial to residential conversion, quite frankly. Exit by sale is one option, but I'm a big fan of exiting by keeping. I don't really do too much exit by sale. I do mainly exit by keeping. Because what I look at, I mean, I used to do a lot of HMOs, but now I'm a big fan of CMOs, a commercial building in multiple occupation. So if I've got a building which is 2 or 3 shops and you know, 5 or 6 flats above, that is a CMO, a commercial building in multiple occupation with multiple streams of cash flow from one building. I find those much easier to deal with than HMOs because it's let and forget. We just build 1-bedroom flats and let and forget. It becomes very, very straightforward. Share with you this other deal that we did. This was an auction purchase. This was bought at Barnet Ross auction this year. So the reason for saying that is that there was nothing special about it, no pre-auction offers or anything like that. Barnet Ross, open auction, anyone could have had this deal. And if you just knew how to put the pieces together, then obviously these sort of deals are out there. So this is 2 shops with offices on the above floors, which are completely defunct, converted under PD into 4 one-bedroom flats. We've got works underway at the moment, steel's going in and all this sort of stuff to make the one-bedroom units. Now, I mentioned before this thing about 30% margin, 40% return on costs. The reason for getting excited about that is this. When you go to exit finance at the end of the project, you can refinance this whole thing on a commercial mortgage at 70% loan to value. So if I have got 30% margin in the deal, then I can pretty much exit at the end with most or all of my money out of the deal. And that gives you your pot back to go again. And whatever cash flow you're making on that project is pretty much an infinite return on cash. That is the holy grail of property investing, the Brewer method, if you like, which is so achievable without having to rely on finding motivated sellers. Because when you look for motivated sellers, you're looking for them to give up the equity. With this, you are finding the equity based on what you know and taking advantage of these new rules that have just come in. So these are the figures on this one. It's 30% margin, 43% return on costs. I won't go through them, but it's not bad. And all the way through the project, it is actually generating a cash flow because the 2 shops are rented out and access works all going from the rear. It doesn't affect the shops one bit. Now, I was going to talk a lot about some skills that you need to learn. I will mention my session that I've got on the 30th of November at 8 p.m. I normally do a live session on and put in a lot of new examples and what's happening. A lot of people come to those and they come repeat times and all of that. The next one I'm doing is on the 30th of November. I do them every couple of weeks, so just go on there and we talk a lot more detail and some live stuff. I know some of you have been on my training. I've been doing commercial property training for several years now, and I teach this sort of stuff as well as doing commercial property as buy-to-let and for your pension, and run a mastermind program too. And you can contact me in all these sort of ways. And I think I am okay, and I'll take questions. Yes, I'll take the high-value area GDV tables questions first. Yeah, go for it.
It's very interesting listening to you to talk about PD, because recently when we had a session with Linda Wright, it'd be great to get the 2 of you on stage at the same time, because I think you both have slightly different views. You seem very bullish about it, and it's all, basically like it always was, it's really simple, whereas she is much more pessimistic.
Okay. Linda is actually our planning consultant on that Leicester project. Now, I've shared stage with Linda. Linda's great. And I don't think we differ. People do not understand the criteria. They think PD, okay, that means I've got a license to do anything. What about this? What about that? What about the other? As long as you know the fixed criteria that they're allowed to judge your application under, then you're good to go. So what Linda is saying, I believe, well, I don't really want to speak for Linda, but when I've heard her speak, I think she's talking about people assume you can do a lot more under PD than you actually can. Yeah? So you've just got to be wary of what you can and can't do and laser target your efforts on what you can do. You know, I get loads of questions. People say to me, well, what about pubs? What about pubs? It's a pain in the neck. Full planning permission, take you years, don't do it. What about churches? You know, God knows whether you're going to get any permission or not. There's so many building types in Class E, just stick with those. And stick with the criteria. Listed buildings, forget about it. It's just too much hassle. You know, if you want to start doing changes to the external envelope, that is under planning permission, and you can get some pushback. But if you know the criteria that they're going to evaluate it under, it will be tick, tick, tick.
Okay. I mean, as a follow-up to that, it would really help.
Sorry, Ines. Can I just mic you for the...
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Sure, thanks.
I think what would be very helpful for a lot of us as well, is to actually have a definitive, quick guide to what you can and can't do under MA and under G. That would be really
Yeah,
helpful.
I had that on one of the slides, and I'll cover a little bit about quite a bit on that on this session on the 30th.
Yeah.
But you know, I think the important thing is to stick with the template. You know, the biggest problem people have, I think, is with natural light. You know, and if you've got natural light in the right places, you're pretty much good to go. There are ways of getting natural light into a building, but it takes longer than the 56 days to get around the system. So it's not that PD is certain if you know what you're doing with it, and specifically what criteria they're going to judge it under, and you know that project meets that criteria.
So perhaps when we get a number of responses, hopefully from the marketing campaign, our first filter, let's say, should be, does it tick all these boxes?
Yes.
And pick the low-hanging fruit, particularly given, as you say, the 18-month period or whatever it's going to be before everybody else catches up.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, there's so much low-hanging fruit right now. I mean, I do feel I know PD inside out, but I will still, before committing to a project, get written advice, paid advice from a planning consultant to go through it and basically validate my first opinion. And I'd recommend everyone do that.
Are you Ranjan? How do?
Hi.
From the poor north.
I knew I'd get some pushback when the mic went to you.
Just wanted to question. That was my accent, by the way. No one recognised that.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, all right. Two ways this works. One with laughter and the way we're doing it. So, just a quick question on your strategy regarding revaluation.
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest, where we're based in Manchester, revaluing just seems more art than science, I'll be honest with you. So when you, the process you're running now, when you go for the PD application and then you look for a valuation, are you taking that valuation into your own hands, or are you allowing a financer to use their panel of at that point? And also, what are you seeing PD uplift value-wise? Because you're the only person I've seen who's actually done one since August and maybe has got to that position.
Yeah, not many people have actually done the MA and G in August, I'll give you that. The value is, you see, when you have, if you want to buy a site which is empty without any PD, the value is, the bank will only give you vacant possession value. And that may not be, that will mean you have to put in more deposit into actually doing it. But if you have got planning permission for the site, then they will look at it differently because it's ready to go. It's spade ready for you to go. And if you combine that with development finance from the same provider, then you should be able to get some interesting funding options. It all depends on the GDVs. As I said, if you've worked on that 30% margin, if you're in challenging areas where the end value of the flats, there's limited demand for them, or they're very, very cheap, they are sub 100K, then it gets a bit more challenging. You see, where this works is that if you sort of work out in your regions, the average national house price is 250K. So what's the average in your region? Where you are within 80% of the national average, this is really, really good. Where you are sort of half the national average, it's very, very challenging because the individual values of the flats are a little bit harder to determine from a bank's point of view. But in that case, what people end up doing is refinancing the whole building on one commercial mortgage at the end, usually based on a cash flow basis.
So are you, when you go in to do the initial application for the development funding then, say we're looking for 100% and a 75% purchase or whatever, are you then applying, at that point, are you looking at it as a commercial valuation, or are you looking for the bricks and mortar valuation? Well,
it varies. I mean, sometimes It depends from bank to bank, because different lenders have different attitudes. When I do it, I tend to, I know some people in the medium value areas tend to go for a commercial valuation based on the rent roll. In the areas that I do personally, I tend to go for bricks and mortar valuation because it just gives the best sort of return. With commercial lending, it is quite different because where residential buy-to-let lending, there's a lot of uniformity from the different lenders that are out there. Different commercial lenders have quite different criteria. And one person may say no, another bank will say yes. It just depends on their view that they take.
Okay. Yeah, great. Cheers.
Are we done for questions? Oh, go on.
Talking about lenders, I have a commercial property portfolio which is largely high street retail with a few bits of resi in there. And quite recently, Lloyds have said to us, they've been very, very good actually. But recently, I got a call from the relationship manager saying, Lloyds are reviewing their whole lending policy in terms of us borrowing money on our portfolio to go and use as a pot to go and buy stuff. They're not prepared to lend against retail and office, and I'm trying to think what else. Anything in the leisure sector, really. And I was just thinking, who are the good lenders out there who are flexible and cheap?
Okay, I mean, Lloyds are always a bit difficult. I've had a lot of luck with Handelsbank, and there are some others. The thing is with commercial lending is that your first loan is not going to be the best terms as your second, third, fourth. Unlike residential buy-to-let, with residential buy-to-let, you get the same terms no matter how many you got. But with commercial, because of the relationship and the portfolio that you build up, the second, third loans become easier. And other banks don't have the same view. They look at the portfolio of debt you've got with them, and they look at the underlying who's paying the rent, and then they factor that in. Now, with the development that I showed in Rickmansworth, what I didn't say about that, because I didn't really have time, we kind of bought that plot, and then we bought another plot on the corner street, which kind of joins that plot from the back. So we're doing them both together and making a super plot. And we're going to exit finance on one freehold. So that will be a freehold that would have 3 shops and 6 flats on one freehold, refinanced on one commercial loan. So that gives lenders comfort because there's a diversity of income stream coming in there to service the mortgage. So it all depends. I mean, Lloyds have always been, whenever I've spoke to them, I found them very difficult, quite frankly. I would say just take each proposition and approach multiple commercial lenders and see what they have to say. Because they all have different attitudes at different times, depending on their appetite at that time. And I'd also recommend with commercial lending, never give more than 25% of your overall debt business to any one lender. Be a commercial loan tart. Because you'll be stuffed if you have all your loans with one lender. And it just gives you more options.